Hi, we're so very glad to have you here and to be all together. I'm starting to think that God doesn't like Wednesdays. I mean, good grief. You know, we have some pretty weather, and then you come to a Wednesday, and just such is life. I'm very happy no matter what the weather is, and it's good to be able to be out and be all together tonight. And it's warm and kind of warm in here. Not all that warm, I guess, but it's certainly warm.
Depends on where you're standing.
That's right.
In front of the TV lights, a little warmer.
So, we're glad to have you tonight. If you're learning with us online, I guess we're not worshiping tonight, but being with us online tonight. And if you're here in person, just real quick, I wanted to show you, Lent is how far away?
It's still a little ways away.
I don't think so.
We're not.
It's about 10 days or so.
It's a couple weeks. I just don't want to. I'm not there yet.
It's hard to believe, but we were working on our devotionals. And so our theme this year, Love Wins. And I think it really came out, our graphic came out really neat. And so that's coming in. And so we'll be having these for everyone.
Not tonight, though.
Not tonight, but in about a week, something like that. And that'll be
2
special.
weeks.
We're going to be soon. Hard to believe. So let's bow for a word of prayer. Oh God, we are so very grateful to be able to come together tonight and to be able to study your word, to open our hearts and our minds to the leading of your Holy Spirit in our lives. We want to be your people who dream, who are growing, who are learning. We want to follow you into the future, for we know that you are truly a God who helps us to rejoice and to give thanks if we will trust in you. So bless us tonight. Speak to our hearts according to the needs we bring. For it is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You know, it is what I love about our faith.
Sam and Ruby.
Oh, yes. If you're watching with us tonight, Sam and Ruby Horse are always here with us every single week. And Sam had to have a procedure, and he's in the hospital, and so he's not here with us tonight. And so if you are getting to watch with us tonight, Sam, just know we're thinking about you and remembering you in our prayers.
To let you know what kind of people they are, I had gone over to visit with Ruby this morning while he was going through the procedure, and the doctor came and said everything was fine, but that they would probably keep him overnight and he'd get to go home tomorrow. And Ruby told me, we probably won't be there tonight. And I'm like, yes, you won't be there. Incredible people and just wonderful. And so keep them in your prayers.
I was kind of hoping you might make it tonight, but I understand. I know how that goes. So, one of the things I do love about our faith is that it's about being born anew. It's about resurrection. It's about all things being made new. It's why we have our theme for this time, which we are doing. And we started off with Isaiah 43 last week, or 2 weeks ago, and where Isaiah says, "Thus the Lord who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings out chariot and horse, army and warrior, they lie down, they cannot rise. They are extinguished, quenched like a wick. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. I'm about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." When you hear that, is there any Bible story that comes to your mind when you hear these kinds of analogies that we're talking about? The chariot and the horse, the army and the warrior, they lie down, they cannot rise, extinguished like a wick. I'm about to do a new thing. Will you not perceive it? A way in the wilderness, rivers in the desert.
A path in the sea. Parting of the Red Sea.
Parting of the Red Sea. I need a hearing aid up front here. So, parting of the Red Sea. Absolutely. The story of Moses. And so that's kind of what we're And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. But we're starting with that line very much. I'm about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you perceive it? I remember very much when I was about to be doing my first funeral. That was a long time ago. This June, I will have been a Methodist pastor for 50 years. And so I started when I was 19 years old. And I remember when I was going to have to do my first funeral, and I was scared to death, and I was talking to Bill Scales. Bill Scales was a wonderful mentor of mine, one of those that you look back and go, you got to have a few people in your life who really open the doors for you, who guide you, who really help you. Bill was obviously a Methodist minister. And so I was saying, what are the things I need to do, and what do I need to, how do you do this? And I didn't know about walking in front of the casket, that the minister's supposed to lead the casket and the pallbearers up to the grave. And so this is in deep East Texas. And so he's saying, you lead, you go around, stand behind the hearse, they'll pull out the casket, pallbearers, and then you lead it up to the grave. And he said, when you get up close to the grave, make sure that you walk wide around it. I said, okay. He said, Bob, this is East Texas, and you got the sandy soil. And he said, I had a friend who was heading up to the graveside, and he's leading the procession, and he got a little too close. And the side of the grave caved in, and he fell into the bottom of the grave.
No. Oh,
and he said, he's lying there face down in the bottom of the grave. And here came along all the pallbearers, and he said, they had to stop, obviously, and he couldn't get out. So they had to put down the casket in order to help reach down into the hole to try to drag the preacher back out of the hole. And he said, if you fall into the bottom of the grave, it's hard to get up and be dignified. So they said, whenever you head up to the grave, walk wide around it so you don't take a chance of falling in. 50 years ago, and if you ever see me doing a funeral, you'll see me walk wide around the grave. I have never forgotten it. But what we also got to talking about was, Bob, he said, falling into a grave is a bad thing. But living in a grave is even worse. He said, because a grave, well, really, it's a rut. And a rut is nothing but a grave with both ends knocked out. And how easy is it to live a life where you've fallen into a rut? Same thing, day in, day out, our routine, and you can live in a grave. It's a rut. Same thing, day in, day out. And I don't believe that's where God calls us to live. I believe God is calling us to live with creativity and newness of life. When I was 18, I started thinking about being a Methodist minister, got my license to preach. That was a tough thing to do back in those days, to get a license to preach. I came before the district committee. They held up a mirror and said, breathe. I fogged the mirror and they said, you're in. And so at 19 years old, I was appointed to a little country church, and I look back and I think, wow, what did I do to those poor people serving at 19 years old, So, but I was at 19, and I had these dreams. I had to get through undergraduate school, and then a dream I got to get through seminary, and then I was starting a new church in Houston, and then a dream about being at Bear Creek and what we could do. And suddenly I was at St. Luke's at 37 years old, and I think about all the dreams. Every time we accomplished something, it was a new dream. We were doing Russia, and then television, and then radio, and then Lifelight, and a campus, and I can just go on. And that's really what makes life exciting. I believe it's what makes life worth living. Those dreams, the newness, and now at almost 69, I have discovered that it doesn't matter whether I was 18 or 69, you still need a dream. You still need that newness of life. What calls you to be learning and growing and living in a sense of meaning? It does not matter age. It really matters one's heart and believing that God is the God of resurrection and the giver of life And I believe God leads us into new things if we are open to them. And that's the issue. Life is always changing, and are we open to the new possibilities of life? You know, right now, as you all know, we're going to be talking for about 4 or 5 weeks, up till March the 19th, which we expect on March the 19th to be taking a vote about the future of our church. And I'm finding it very exciting as we start thinking about the future of what it may be, because we have so many opportunities in front of us. And I was talking with a retired Methodist bishop today. It's kind of strange when you, again, get to be this age. I have a lot of friends who are retired and Methodist bishops. And so when I was young, I would have looked at that like, oh my goodness. No, they're a lot of my friends. So anyway, I was talking to one of them who was a friend, and we were visiting and we're reminiscing and laughing about back when we were youngsters and we were 20s and 30s and serving in the churches, and just how much we loved the church, we loved going to conference, and all these things that we were doing. We had great reminiscing and memories. And then we started talking about the realities of life now, how life does change. And the United Methodist Organization has been in a real serious decline for the last 30 plus years, and really in the last 15. And it made us both sad, but we were talking about it, and I was telling him the things that we were thinking about at St. Luke's. And it was fun to see him get so excited and say, I think you guys are doing the right thing. And I think it's so exciting to hear the dreams that you're having and what you're talking about doing. And that meant a lot to me, to say, yeah, we are dreaming new dreams and exciting things and what we can do and be. And he was saying, absolutely, that's what we, as the larger church, should be doing. Because remember, first and foremost, when you came and joined St. Luke's, we said, will you reaffirm the vows you took at the time of your baptism? It wasn't about any denomination, it was, you're a Christian. We are Christian first and foremost, a part of God's universal church. Secondly, we said, will you be loyal to this church? Support it with your prayers, presence, gifts, and service. What does it mean to be a part right now of the Methodist Church? And then we always ask a third question at St. Luke's, will you live in such a way that you share God's love and bring hope in the world? We know what our mission is. And so, first and foremost, we're part of the Church Universal, the Church of Jesus Christ. And so we must always be dreaming new dreams. And the key is, are we looking for how God will lead us into the future? Because God does lead if we are open to see. Which is exactly what happened to Moses. Moses was out watching over his flock one day, and he saw a bush that was burning and it didn't burn. And that's enough to catch your attention if you're paying attention. There's one thing to see a burning bush, but to realize it's not being burned up. And he saw, and he goes over and he hears the voice, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. And then to hear a message from God saying, I want you to go to the Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. And the first response, does anybody remember his response? No, I can't do that. You want me to go to Pharaoh? You want me to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go? What an overwhelming, significant challenge. No, I'm not going to do that. And so God says, well, I really do want you to do that. He said, look, how about if I take my brother Aaron? Fine, take your brother Aaron if you want your brother Aaron. Well, I really is not still sure I can go. I mean, you go through this fun story of, well, give you a staff, throw it down, it'll turn into a snake, and all the reasons why Moses didn't want to see the opportunity, didn't want to take the opportunity for something incredibly important and new. Go to the Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. So we all know the story of how Moses does go to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh says, well, thanks for dropping by, but no, I'm not letting the people go. I appreciate all these slaves that are working and building our things. No. And so he brings the plagues. First of all, he's going to turn water into blood. And we've been a little slow on the slides here. So we had Moses coming before the Pharaoh. I love these old, I mean, this is Cecil B. DeMille.
This is biblical.
These are biblical. This is Charlton Heston coming before the
Yul
Pharaoh.
Brynner as the Pharaoh.
Doesn't get any better than this. Let my people go. And no, I don't think I'm going to do that. So we're going to bring, I'll see in your own mind, I won't quiz you, but just start thinking, how many of the plagues can you remember? I get to read them.
Blood.
Water turning to blood. The frogs. Yeah. We had the frogs, the plague of the frogs. There was the lice, flies, pestilence with the livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally, the death of the firstborn. And you remember how they were told, kill a lamb, put your blood on the doorpost, the angel of death will come along and pass over your house, and you will be spared. We're getting ready to go into Lent. We will talk about Passover that the Jews celebrate to this day, and Passover is about the night that the angel of death passed over the houses of the Jews and the firstborn in Egypt died. That's where Passover comes from. And so when that happened that night, finally the Pharaoh says, all right, get out of here. They grabbed what they had, and of course they hadn't had time for the bread, the leaven in the bread, for the bread to rise. That's why you talk about unleavened bread, which we don't use. We use Mrs. Baird's bread that rose twice.
Like fluffy, tasty bread.
But unleavened bread is what was being used on that night.
It's not as tasty.
It's not near as tasty. They head for the Red Sea to get out of there, and that's where one of my favorite passages comes about, when they get to the Red Sea. And now Pharaoh's changed his mind. He's in the chariots and the horses, and they're coming after them. And they're trapped between the Pharaoh and the Red Sea. What do you do in that moment? When you've been trying to get free, when you thought you were being led into a new dream, and now you've run into this obstacle, and here comes the bad stuff. Here comes the Pharaoh. And they're there at that moment, and already one of the very first times, we're going to look at several tonight, they say, we should have stayed in Egypt. It would have been better to stay back where we were as slaves than to be out here trapped now. And how many times you and I, we think we want something new, and then we discover, the rut was a lot safer.
The unknown, something about the unknown is to choose slavery over the unknown.
You really do look at that. You think, okay, I'd rather go back to be slavery because I'm stuck here and I don't know what. But so Moses is there. What do we do? And I love the statement, tell the people to go forward. That was the word of God to Moses, tell the people to go forward. We're facing the Red Sea. I think it's when they take that first step into the sea that Cecil B. DeMille turns on the fans. And if you've watched the movie, you see what starts to happen as the sea parts. Now, a lot of scholars say that they probably went north to the Red Sea, and the northern part of the Red Sea isn't 30 feet deep. It's really kind of marshy, and people on foot can make it through, and horses and chariots and heavy, they're going to get bogged down and they don't make it through. I kind of like Cecil B. DeMille's a little more. I like it. And we're going through. I don't really care which way it happened. What I believe very much is God delivered in a moment when there was no other way. Tell the people to go forward. And as you and I start this year, I hope it's the message that we can hear. Tell the people to go forward. That's how you start leaving bondage and you move into a new land.
But of course, as they pass through, they get into the wilderness. And if you've been to the region of the Holy Land, for me, wilderness always brought to mind jungle. I don't know why, but wilderness seems like overgrown plants and stuff. In biblical terms, wilderness means desert, a rocky desert of nothingness, a place where you need a shepherd to guide the sheep for sprigs of grass and to find the water. And it's a place where you have to rely on God. So they're in the wilderness. They weren't able to make it into the promised land because we'll talk about that, but they're in the wilderness area. And again, like a sheep needs the shepherd to find food, this huge group of people needed God to provide food. And so you remember that Moses would tap the stone when water would spew forth. God also provided manna and quail, manna in the morning and quail in the evening, and every day that they were in the wilderness. And, I thought it was very nice. They had manna and quail, so they never got tired of that every single day for all those years. Yes.
Okay.
But there's a lesson to me. This would be the hardest lesson. I am somebody who likes to stockpile. I would have gotten in trouble with the manna because I like to make sure I've got my bases covered. When I go to the cabinets, I like to have 2 of everything because if you only have 1, what happens? You use it and you're out. So you need 2. And for the manna, God says, only get this day's worth, except in regards to the evening before the Sabbath. They were to gather 2 portions worth so they didn't have to work on the Sabbath. That really would have been a hard lesson. And there's something about it that we rebel against. And yet, what is God doing in that moment? I mean, every day for 40 years, over and over, God is telling them, rely on me. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to take care of your needs. I know what you need. And so every day, I bet every day this was still a struggle. There were people that, for one reason or another, maybe it was out of fear, that they gathered more because they weren't sure it would still be there. There were people that maybe out of laziness, look, I'll get plenty today and I won't have to do this tomorrow. Except for the times about the Sabbath, if they gathered more than 1 day's worth, it would rot, it would get wormy. And I can't think of anything more gross than wormy manna. But there was a lesson to be learned. How is it that we learn that lesson? Where we can just, okay, whatever the journey is ahead, I don't know, but I'm going to walk this with you. I remember, and this will seem a weird analogy, but I can tell you when our birth mother was pregnant with the child we would name as Hannah, our daughter, I remember all these kind of fears. And I was like, oh my gosh, what if this happens, or what if this happens? What if she's not smart? What if she looks completely different? I went through all these things, and at one point, I remember almost hearing kind of this voice or this, just a message kept coming through. Why are you worrying about this? Whatever happens, this is your child. And so you'll have this child, you'll deal with whatever happens, whatever it is, God will be with me, and Hannah would be my child. So I would handle anything, and by the way, she was perfect, incredibly smart, beautiful, but a lot of times we worry about the unknown when God wants to say, look, I'm going to be right there with you. I'm going to provide for your deepest needs, and I will help you in those moments that the circumstances of life get so rough. I will be there for you at every moment. I find that still a really difficult lesson for us to learn. What is the ways that we can prepare for the future, but trust God day to day to see us through? We all have a tendency to plan and prepare and go through our lists. And God still calls us back to say, gather enough for today. I'll take care of tomorrow. I think it's a good spiritual lesson. As we face the future, there's so much that we can't control. There's so much, when we look into a kind of hazy future, all we can do is to be our best, following God, do the right things here and now, and truly trust God for the rest. Going to Russia, I'd never been, and you just get little nuggets of information. It's really quite different. And Hannah and I were going on a trip. This is, I guess, been 10, 15 years ago. And you fly into Moscow, then you take an overnight train ride to Ulyanovsk. And we get to Ulyanovsk, and we're still kind of jet lagged, and it's first thing in the morning, and they open the doors, and these wonderful group of people, it's freezing cold. It's winter in Ulyanovsk, Russia. So freezing cold. And my teenage daughter, Hannah, we got our luggage, and all of a sudden I saw her being passed to somebody that I totally didn't know. She was ushered into a car, and there she went. People I didn't know took my daughter, and I was taken with another, it happened to be Pastor Nadia, so I knew her, but I had no way to contact my daughter. They didn't have international cell phone plans then, and I really had to, there was this moment of, okay, am I going to freak out? Because I kind of wanted to. I felt like as a mom, this is a situation, strangers just took your daughter. You should freak out at that. And yet, God was so present, and I really did. There was nothing else I could do. She was already gone by that moment. I really did feel this sense of peace. I knew that she was being cared for and loved, and that God was with her, and we were still connected, even though we were in a world away, and we couldn't speak the language. We couldn't get in contact with each other. I knew that God had my daughter.
One of my favorite scriptures, be not anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Let the day's own troubles be sufficient for the day. Jesus was telling his disciples, and after all this time of Moses being in the wilderness and having to learn one day at a time, I will give you what you need today, and I'll give you tomorrow what you need tomorrow. But I won't give you what you need tomorrow until tomorrow. I'll give you what you need today.
If we had known what the pandemic would be like, we would have freaked out. Mm-hmm. It was like God gave us a cheap flashlight. The kind of $3 or $4 flashlights that you're going through the checkout, and you look over to the right, and they have a bin of cheap flashlights that last maybe a couple nights. And they have this little kind of measly yellow circle of light that, it's only a couple of steps. I really felt like at the beginning of the pandemic, that's what God let us see. That we had basically 2 steps ahead of us, if that, because we couldn't have handled to see everything. If we had been told, oh, you're going to be shut down for about a year, you're not going to be able to pass the plate, people won't be able to come to your church building, it was too much. We had this little bad flashlight of light, and that was enough for in that moment. And truly, because we thought we were going to be out a couple of weeks, then we'd be back. Because that's all it takes to get over a pandemic, I guess, is what we thought. But it was every day, and that's what God gave us. God gave us another day and another day.
It was so interesting when the pandemic started. If you were here, you may remember there was a real struggle. Does churches close or not close? What are we supposed to do? And so we had all discussed it and said, Bob, you need to cut a video, tell the church we're meeting on Sunday. So I think that came out on
March 14th.
And so that was maybe Friday, I guess, that video came.
I know we were still saying it on Saturday because Keith King Reverend Keith King texted me Saturday morning before the 15th. And I said, yes, we're going to have church tomorrow.
Because after I sent it out, yes, we're having church, the next day I got on there and said, King's X, we're not having church after all. And so we canceled church then on Sunday, thinking it would be for a couple of weeks.
I had to text Keith back at, I think it was like 2 p.m. that afternoon.
So we're not going to meet after all. Easter was a few weeks away. Surely we'll be back for Easter. And if you'd have told us, no, you're going to lose Easter, you're going to lose Christmas Eve. And you may not be back the next Easter. As when he said, I don't know that we could have handled that, but you really did learn to live one day at a time.
And so we didn't need to handle that info. In hindsight, God handled it. God took us through. God blessed St. Luke's more than really we could have ever imagined. But step by step, God held it in his hands and led us through.
And so all you need to know is, be not anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Let the day's own troubles be sufficient for the day. So the people of Israel had to learn about that. They're in the wilderness. They'd been in the wilderness for about 2 years. And 2 years of eating manna and quail. They're moving along towards the promised land. We know they come in basically on the south side of the promised land. And when they arrive, Moses camps the people out and he gets 12 spies. Can anybody tell me why there were 12 spies? Yes. This is a smart group. Okay, the 12 tribes of Israel. And so you have the 12 tribes of Israel, one representative from each tribe. You're going to go into the promised land and you're going to tell us what you see. And so the spies go into the land. When they come back, I like the old picture where it shows them with a pole, and hanging off the pole are the grapes, and there you go. You're carrying the grapes. They're enormous. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. Not sure I'm crazy about that idea, but it's a land flowing with milk and honey. You have this incredible, it's supposed to be telling you how lush it is.
For milk, it's good for livestock. Honey talks about bees and pollination. It's good for crops. So all your livestock, and you can farm here.
It's going to be a perfect place. So they have all this to come back to say, it is a great place. It is our promised land. The kind of place we would want to go live, how good this will be. But they come back and they bring this and they say, yep, you have led us to a land flowing with milk and honey. It is the promised land. But there's a little problem. The problem is there's people living here. And not just people, they are giants. These are big people living in fortified cities. And can anybody tell me what they thought about themselves? And we are like grasshoppers in their sight. I love that line. We are like grasshoppers in their sight. In other words, these people are big. And look at how inadequate we are. And we've now come here. What are we going to do to try to move into the promised land?
Remember, they were slaves, and they were like the nomadic tribes. And on the technology scale, they were at the bottom rung. And so every time they encounter another civilization, it's like they're coming in from the swamplands and meeting the high society people. We sometimes when we read and identify with them, we make them kind of more advanced than they were, but they had nothing. They didn't have the skills or the tools or the weapons.
So they are facing huge obstacles. How do we move into the promised land? And again, when I look at that, I think how often that really is the case in our lives as you and I are being called to dream. God is giving us a future, something exciting to see, and how easy it is to suddenly look at all the obstacles and they seem so large to the things we want to do. I love that story I shared in a sermon a while back, if you weren't here just a couple of weeks ago, about the lady who had always dreamed about being a singer. And when she was a child and living in Cuba, and her father said, no, you can't be a singer. You can sing for the family, but you can't sing in public. And she didn't until finally she had her own family, her grandchildren, and it was her grandson who now was a music producer and wanted to listen to her sing and went, Granny, you are incredible. And she's playing all the songs that she wrote. And so she was like 92 years old when he decided to create a concert where she sang. And I love the way he introduced her and said, help the dreams of a teenager come true. My grandmother at 92, and she comes out and sings and is so good that in the end they start cutting a record, and she won a Latin Grammy at 95 years old for Best New Artist. Okay? I mean, that just happened here not long ago. So, but to see those obstacles that she would be facing and to believe, can I actually cut a record? Can I be a singer at 95 years old? And the answer was yes. I mean, she was a lady of great faith. I'm going to go try. I'm going forward. And so I just think that so often for you and I, we see these obstacles. We know how big they are. And we feel like they are giants and we are grasshoppers in their sight. And it is so easy to be afraid and not try. And again, I think, what do we miss at whatever phase we are in life because we're afraid and we don't try? The obstacle seems so great. And so they did not go into the promised land. They turned around, went back into the wilderness. That decision cost them 38 years. They would be in the wilderness another 38 years because they did not go in when they had the opportunity.
38 more years of manna and quail. Versus, they brought all of this wonderful food and, yeah.
It really was. And so God said, all of you who came here, who were in slavery, who came here and were afraid, you're going to die in the wilderness. Your children, those who are 20 and under, said, you will be able to enter into the promised land. But for all of you who did not trust that God would lead you in, then we're going to let you die out here in the wilderness. And that was the issue. The issue was not, were there giants and we are grasshoppers in their sight. The issue was, God said, I've led you to the promised land, and you don't trust God to lead you into the future.
It wasn't that God didn't want them to go in. They said no.
And so that was, again, our fear sometimes is we look at ourselves and think, we don't have the ability to go do that. The problems are going to be too great, so we don't try. Out of fear, because we are not strong enough and good enough. And the issue is supposed to be, the lesson, it is not just about, are we called to give our best and try? Absolutely. But it's not just up to us, it's to God. And it's about, we talk about faith. Faith, as we define it, is trusting in God's constant love of us, His children. So do we trust that God will constantly love us as we are being called into the future and something new, and we may not have all the answers, but we're willing to try? When I got out of seminary, my good friend Bill Scales, who told me to walk wide around the grave, was now a district superintendent. And it was in the southwest part of Houston. And Houston was booming. This was back in the late 70s into the early 80s. And so we were starting lots of Methodist churches all around the outskirts of Houston because, it was the growth place. And so we were starting church after church. The person who loved to push this was Finis Crutchfield, who was from Oklahoma. He had been in McFarland, was elected a bishop, and in the end, he became the bishop down in Texas. So Finis Crutchfield was my bishop. Charles Crutchfield, his son, also became elected a bishop, and when he retired, he came to Oklahoma City because his mother was living here in Oklahoma City, and he came and he was a part of St. Luke's, and he and his wife are just incredible people. So anyway, down there, Finance Crutchfield was my bishop, and Bill Scales sat on the cabinet. He was a DS. It was his turn that year to start a new church, and so he called me up and said, Bob, would you like to start a new church? And I have to say, I had all kinds of visions of what I was going to do when I got out of seminary. Starting a new church was not one of them. I expected to go be an associate pastor with Muzan Biggs. He was my mentor, and in the end, he would wind up being pastor at Boston Avenue here in Tulsa. But I expected I'd go and be his associate pastor. He was there in Beaumont, and then they came and said, do you want to start a new church? Now, I knew that a lot of people starting new churches, man, the growth was so fast in Houston. What an opportunity. Could be a game changer for you. And most people were in their early 30s who got that opportunity. I was 25. It did not help people to like me, but he offered me that opportunity. And so I went to go visit with Finance Crutchfield, and I interviewed with him, and he said, go there in peace. You can do this. So I got the opportunity. The one thing he did say was, he said, Bob, you just need to know before you go out there, we don't have any buildings or anything. We don't have any land. We don't have any members. We don't know anybody who's interested. But there's a lot of potential. Good luck. God bless you. When you have a church, come back and let us know.
That was the opportunity.
This was my first appointment out of seminary. It was to an area of town in Houston who did not know that I was coming, did not care that I was coming. They had very little money. I had no money with which to advertise. In fact, I made $1,000 a month when I got out of seminary. They had enough to pay my salary, and that was the grant. So Marsh and I showed up to live in an apartment, and I'll never forget, we did have to find a place to meet, and so I started looking around to try to find somewhere that we could meet, because this part of town was just all brand new, and there was no, there was a funeral home. But man, I just thought, I don't know about that every Sunday morning, if they would, because I knew some churches that did that will meet here in the chapel at the funeral home. So I'm going to keep looking. I'm not sure about that one. So I couldn't find, there was no movie theaters, there were no large places to meet. Finally, I found the right place. I thought there was a country western bar called Fool's Gold. And they had a nice area, they had a stage, they had microphones, equipment. The bar kind of created two areas. You could have a Sunday school classroom. So I went to the owner and I said, okay, my name is Bob Long. I'm wanting to start a new Methodist church in your area. Could I meet here? And he rocked back in his chair and he said, are you serious? And I said, yes, sir, I really am. And he thought about it and went, okay. He said, we'll come in, we'll clean up extra early on Sunday morning so you can have a space and you can do it. Whew, okay. So I went back to Finance Crutchfield, our bishop, and said, Bishop, I found a place to start the new church. It's at a place called Fool's Gold. He rocked back in his chair and he said, are you serious? Yes, sir, I am. He thought about it and said, God bless you, go in peace. So I had created a small little group of people, and we were talking all about it, and someone said, Bob, have you checked out Fort Bend schools? I checked out A-Leaf schools, that was the county, and they had a rule no churches could start in schools like we did up in Edmond for our Edmond campus. Couldn't meet in the schools. But we were right on the county line, and right on the other side of the county line was Fort Bend, and there was a school, and I did not know about it, and I went there, met the principal and said, would you consider letting us meet here? And they said, well, a Catholic church has been meeting here for the last 5 years, and next Sunday is their last Sunday as they're moving into a building. So I took that as a sign that God wanted us to go to Town West Elementary instead of Fool's Gold. Worst decision I ever made. It'd have been a better story at Fool's Gold. But we went to Town West Elementary. So the way we were going to start was, before that very first Sunday, I walked up and down the streets, knocking on doors, inviting people to come to church. I had no money. There's nothing else to do. 8 hours a day, I walked up and down the streets, knocked on the door, and said, I'd like to invite you to come to church. And I have to tell you, talk about feeling overwhelming, feeling like a grasshopper. I mean, I'm trying to find total strangers who do not know me to come to somewhere that I'm hoping to find and say, I want you to come to church. I felt that the hill to climb was enormous. And I'll never forget the day that I was out in Mission Bend knocking on doors and no one was home. I'd been walking for hours knocking on doors and no one answered the door. And it's one of those moments in life I remember so clearly. I walked to my car and I put my key in the door to unlock it and go home. I was done. And it's not often that I can say I hear voices, but it was a moment where I felt like I truly heard God speak and say, if you go home now, it's going to be hard to come back. And I stood there for I don't know how long with the key in the door, hearing, debating, and I finally pulled the key back out of the door. And very quickly I walked across the street and knocked on another door, and God bless her, Mary in Champaign opened the door. Hello, my name is Bob Long. I'm starting a new Methodist church in your neighborhood. If you're not an active part of a local church, I'd like to invite you to come. I said that thousands of times, quite literally. And Miriam smiled and said, I'm Methodist, and I don't have a church home. Why don't you come in and have a piece of pie? You can tell this was 1979. Who's going to open your door to a stranger and invite them to come in and have a piece of pie, even if they say, I'm a Methodist minister? So I came in, had a piece of pie. We talked. I'm telling her all about my hopes and dreams with this church. She said, that really sounds exciting. I think my husband and I'd like to be a part of that. She said, have you talked to Don and Jane Parson? I said, no. Well, they live right across the street. I'll call them and tell them you're coming. I walked across the street and knocked on the door. There was Don and Jane. Don would become the first chair of our administrative board when we formed as a church. They were wonderful. When we had our daughter Kelly and came home from the hospital, we didn't have a parsonage. It was being moved. We lived with Don and Jane for a while. I didn't know them, met Don and Jane. They said, man, we're Methodist. We'd love to help start a Methodist church out in this neighborhood. Have you visited with Rick and Gail? No. They're right across the street. I'll call them. I went across the street, visited with Rick and Gail. Wonderful people. They became leaders in our church. They said, have you talked to Bucky and Brenda? No. Well, they're 3 doors down on our side of the street. We'll call them. I walked down and met Bucky and Brenda Harvell. They became some of our best friends. He became chair of the finance committee. He said, have you talked to John and Judy? No. Well, they live right across the street. They didn't offer to call. But I went right across the street and knocked on the door. They had one of these doors. It was kind of a reflective glass. You know how you can see one way out and can't see the other way in? I had no idea that Judy was standing on the other side of the door. She was looking at some guy knocking on her door, and she debated whether to open the door or not. She finally did. I said, I'm Bob Long. Bucky and Brenda just sent me over here. Oh, well, great, come in. And so Santa and talked. They would join the church. They had not been going to church, became active in the church. I found out just a few years ago, some people who joined up here from Houston, they were in church with the Goodales, John and Judy, who had raised their kids in the Methodist church and very active. And Judy said, do you know why I let you in that day? I said, no. She said, I needed a vacuum cleaner. And I thought you looked like a vacuum salesman. Turned their life completely around. I got ready to leave, and they said, have you visited Jim Moore, right up around the top? Jim and Diane? No. Went up there, Jim and Diane were there. Became the first chair of our trustees. 6 families who became the core of the church, and I had the key in the door to go home. I was not the one who made it all happen. I will always believe that God was opening those doors that day. God was leading. And the hill seemed so high to climb. But when I listened to the voice and was willing to try, what happened that day changed my life, changed their life, and 40 years later, there's still a Methodist church down in Mission Bend in Houston. It's not about us. We're going to run into the obstacles. This is a promised land. And what do we need? God is going to lead us into the promised land. It's not just about you and me, what we can do. It's about learning to trust God to lead us into the future.
Questions?
Do you want to tell them about Joshua? Don't have to.
So, the people have been in the wilderness.
You want to save that for next week?
Do you have any questions?
Do you have any questions about anything? Yes.
These people that you gathered, did they have any prior religious experience or exposure to any other church?
Some did, some did not. Some had been raised, I say John and Judy had not been in church. Brenda and Bucky had not been in church. I loved it. It was so great. So people were so honest, and we were going to show up for our very first finance committee meeting. They had to create everything from scratch. Showed up at their very first finance committee meeting, Bucky and Brenda. They're a great host. And man, they had hors d'oeuvres and wine and mixed drinks out. And I'm going, I don't think we served that at our finance committee meetings.
It made for a great offering that first night.
So, it was like, oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to have to think about this. So I had to say, I don't think we're going to do that in the future for our finance meetings. So some yes, some no, and we truly were establishing culture from the beginning. She didn't talk to her for a week.
She was not happy for a bit, I would say that. And she ended up having just the experience of a lifetime. For her, she actually went with people. He asked what Hannah thought when she was whisked away at the train station. Hannah, because we had a good group that time, most of us stayed with people in the church, but they had also arranged with people who were connected to the church but actually not part of it. And Hannah stayed with a family, wonderful people, and had relations in the church, but they were actually atheist. And Hannah was like, her range was people who didn't go to church. And so she kind of knew that. She had really never encountered people, what do you mean you don't believe in God? I mean, that was just kind of messing with her mind. And just to see how God used her and that family. And it was, I wouldn't say it was warm and fuzzy at every moment, but it really challenged her. And she could see kind of afterwards how God used her in that moment with a family who he didn't have not only a church connection, but they didn't have a direct connection with God, and how she got to be there and show them what God's love looks like. She was probably 16, 17.
We had a number of teenagers, older teenagers go, and you talk about life changing.
Yeah.
talk about profound, as they went to a different culture, began to be there. Unfortunately, I don't know when we'll be going back to Russia. We do have several churches that are still going. We support them. We will continue to support the Ulyanovs United Methodist Church. This was the 30th anniversary this year. We also have St. Luke's Methodist Church in Ulyanovs, a second church. Like I say, we still support them financially. Linda Harker, one of our ministers on staff, she speaks with the pastor at the Ulyanovs Methodist Church via Zoom every Tuesday morning to be a mentor to her, to talk about being pastor, how do you be leading the church, and different ideas. So we're very involved with these churches who are still blessing life and sharing God's love in challenging circumstances. There was a young lady who was there, she and her best friend, and they had been talking about God and were so curious. They were teenagers when we showed up the first time. They were going, you need to come and hear these people from America. They're talking about God. And they were both so excited. One came to the United States and in the end got married, fell in love, and she still lives here in the United States. The other one came here, went to OCU, went to seminary at St. Paul, went back to Russia, and she is in Siberia.
Literally.
Literally
Yeah.
Siberia. And we see what she does under the most harsh of circumstances. And again, we are very much in contact and supportive of them. So it was truly one of those, it felt overwhelming. I cannot tell you the amazing stories that all began to happen where we felt God was leading us in incredible ways. It truly is about opening our eyes and seeing and not being afraid to go. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Can you not see? Can you see?
I have a question back there.
Well, actually, when you said you had the key in the door and then you turned around and went back, I was going, yay, you won't have to wait 38 years. And not just for those 6 families, but everyone.
It's exactly right. What changed in a moment because you don't quit? What will God do if we don't quit? And whatever that might mean in your life, at this stage where you are personally, I think what it means for us as a church, that's what I'm excited about right now. I don't know what the future's going to be. I'm not afraid of it. I think that is one value of age. You get a little less worried. You start to trust a little more and go, I know it's going to be okay when we go into the future. And I know that it's God who's going to be leading us if we're willing to trust and open our eyes and see. And it's going to be exciting. Yes?
What's the latest on the other Methodist conferences that were forming? You talked about a couple last semester.
I would say that the Global Methodist Church, they're having some of their convening organizational conferences. So that's one denomination. We've said that St. Luke's that's not a good fit for St. Luke's. We have several friends who will be part of the Global Methodist Church. But as we said, that's going to be one that is more strict, that everybody believe along the same lines. They're not going to be an organization, think and let think. If St. Luke's were to disaffiliate, we have done preliminary work to be a part of an organization that, again, we've designed this, and it really would be a small group in the style of John Wesley. John Wesley would bring individuals together who all hungered for a closer walk with God. And that's how they had great accountability for one another. Because when you sign up saying, I need this, it formed deep friendships, and they kept each other accountable. In that sort of fashion, we could see a group of churches and pastors coming together for mutual accountability, fellowship, ideas and training and worship. And so if St. Luke's were to disaffiliate, that could be in place almost immediately.
Wesley Methodist Society. And again, it'd be... Yes, the connectionalism would still be there, which is important for us. We want to be with other Methodist churches, like-minded churches. And we're very excited about what that will be. And there's a lot of churches who are talking about it and being a part of it, various sizes. And the fun thing, some are more traditional, some are more progressive, which is, again, something we like because we're not trying to make everybody think the same. We want to be respectful of a variety of our opinions, so long as everybody is respectful of one another. And all of these churches really are that way. So we're actually very excited about what it could be. I'm doing a new thing. Do you not see it? What's it going to be? It's going to be fun to be a part of that. Truly creating something new.
Denominations in looking at forming, will it be more regional or will it encompass more of other parts of the country?
She asked, would this new group, this new denomination be more regional or more parts of the country? I think largely regional, although there could be churches from other parts of the country. It's not designed around being regional. That was kind of a practical thing. The whole thing, the most important part of it is just to be able to work with other churches that want to work with other churches and have the understanding. We're going to kind of be at different points, but we're going to focus on the weightier issues of life. And kind of the binding commitment will be an adherence to the greatest commandment, to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbors as self. So if people can choose to live by that, that's kind of the group we want to be a part of. How can we better do that over and over? How can we help other churches do that? If they don't want to vote that way, they're not part of the group.
There is a reason that the theme this year is based on the greatest commandment. I really do think it is the most important thing we do. All right, we're so glad you came out tonight. It's been a lot of fun. We hope it leaves you with something to think about. We will see you next week.
Thank you all. The greatest commandment, to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbors as self. So if people can choose to live by that, that's kind of the group we want to be a part of. How can we better do that over and over? How can we help other churches do that? If they don't want to vote that way, they're not part of the group.
There is a reason that the theme this year is based on the greatest commandment. I really do think it is the most important thing we do. All right, we're so glad you came out tonight. It's been a lot of fun. We hope it leaves you with something to think about. We will see you next week.
Thank you all.